And that's what a farm bill does. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this bill so the process can continue. With that, Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlelady from Ohio.
Thank you very much, and I thank the gentleman for yielding me the customary 30 minutes. And I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. You know, I asked my colleagues in this House, why are we here today? The original Farm Bill, H.R. 1947, passed out of the Agriculture Committee with bipartisan support. While this bill eventually died when it came to the floor, I have to thank the chairman and the ranking member for their leadership and desire to work together for the common good of all of the American people. Today's exercise is nothing more than a waste of our time and an insult to every American in need. The Cantor bill includes the same toxic amendments that derailed the Farm Bill's passage the first time around. The fact that we are considering this legislation makes me question whether the Republican leadership even wants a farm bill. The Cantor bill guts nutrition for those most in need and says to the poor, to hungry children, to the disabled, seniors, and our veterans, you don't matter. You are not worthy of our help. They deserve better. I've heard the stories from my constituents who struggle every month on whether to pay for medicine or food because they cannot afford both. SNAP recipients will already see a reduction in their benefits beginning November 1st when the temporary 2009 Recovery Act temporary benefit ends. It will be reduced by as much as $300 per year for some people. That is a staggering amount. Many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle look at SNAP purely from a dollars and cents standpoint. Earlier this year, I participated in a panel on poverty. One of the young ladies from Witnesses to Hunger said, people do a lot of talking about us. They refer to SNAP beneficiaries as statistics. But I'm not a statistic. I am a real person struggling to get by. This bill would abandon 5.7 million people during the time when they need us the most. No one can justify a bill of $40 billion in cuts when 47% of all SNAP recipients are children under the age of 18. And I cannot justify such cuts when 16.5% of all SNAP households include seniors. This bill is more than a sucker punch. To those in need, it may be their fatal blow. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves the balance of her time. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I rise for the purpose of a colloquy with the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Rogers.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the issue of our veterans as it relates to H.R. 3102. I commend you for working to include important reforms to the SNAP program in this bill. However, some concerns have been raised regarding the bill's impact on veterans who rely on SNAP benefits. While the eligibility and work requirement reforms included in this legislation are important, I believe they will have unintended consequences for our veterans. Some of our veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan live in a world that is somewhere between battle fatigue and PTSD. That means they may need a little extra time to transition from service to employment than their fellow citizens. And unfortunately, veterans have been hit hard during the recession. They are unemployed at rates higher than the rest of the country. In Michigan alone, there are 25,000 unemployed veterans staring down at a north of 9% unemployment rate. I ask the chairman if he would commit to work with me in conference to include language ensuring veterans remain protected in the future the way they are protected today. While this would not impact a large number of soldiers, sailors, and Marines, it would have a huge impact on the confidence of our service members have in our government to keep our promise to them. And that promise is that when you put your life on the line for the United States of America, you will have the support, especially in these difficult economic times, of the people of the United States. Our nation's veterans have sacrificed for this country, and it is especially important that in difficult times they have this support. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yield to me. As the gentleman from Michigan knows, because he's been a leader in this area, Congress is committed to ensuring that our nation's veterans have the support they need to enter successful civilian careers after the military service. This House, led by passing wow to our Hire Heroes Act, a comprehensive jobs bill to reduce veteran unemployment by retraining veterans to make them more competitive in today's job market. And I'm pleased that the Senate followed our lead and passed the act, and it is now law. This bill does not target veterans, though I understand the concerns you have raised today. As long as a veteran meets the asset and income test needs or test currently in SNAP law, complies with the applicable work requirements, he or she will continue to receive nutrition benefits. And as with all disabled adults, veterans who have a physical or mental disability are exempt from work requirements. There are also numerous federal job training programs and education programs specifically targeting veterans that spend over $10 billion a year to ensure our veterans can get back to work. And additionally, we currently provide up to 73 weeks of unemployment benefits for veterans in our highest unemployed states. Even so, I know I speak for the entire Ag Committee when I say we are committed to protecting our veterans in a way that honors their service and sacrifice to our nation. And I look forward to working with the gentleman to make sure that the final conference committee agreement does just that. Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Madam Speaker, I yield the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway, 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I rise today in strong support of H.R. 3102, the Nutrition Reform and Work Opportunity Act. Today, the House of Representatives has the opportunity to pass a bill that makes the greatest reforms to SNAP since the bipartisan 1996 Welfare Reform Act, and it, yes, in fact, does result in less spending. Opposing this bill is a vote for the status quo in Washington. Our goal throughout this process has not been to take millions of people off of food stamps, but to restore the integrity of the program and ensure that this safety net is preserved for the families most in need. The arguments you will hear from the other side of the aisle are just theatrics. Theatrics that if you listen to them out of context, you would assume that we're destroying or eliminating the entire SNAP program. Well, we are not talking about eliminating the SNAP program. We're committed to finding solutions that work with the resources that we actually have. Today, we have an opportunity to modernize the nutrition program, to close loopholes, and to most importantly, to keep the safety net intact for qualified American families who depend on this assistance every day. This bill rids nutrition policy of provisions that have weakened the system. It will seek to limit the public assistance program to those who qualify and to close loopholes that have been used to game the system. It will also create a more efficient and effective program for the Americans who really need it. This bill gives people the tools to become self-sufficient, find work, and make a better life for themselves and the children. The Nutrition Reform and Opportunity Act is a good bill that reforms nutrition policy and returns accountability to the food stamp program, and yes, Madam Speaker, it does reduce spending. I urge my colleagues to vote yes and support this good work. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me just say that I find it not theatrics that 5,000 active-duty families would be kicked off of food stamps if this bill passes as it is given to us today. Madam Speaker, it is my distinct honor to yield to our Assistant Democratic Leader, the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Clyburn, for 3 minutes.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the gentlelady for yielding me the time. Madam Speaker, I rise today in opposition to H.R. 3102, the latest attempt by the Republican majority to add more insults to the injuries that have been inflicted upon the working families, making their lives much more difficult. It's become clear to me that some of my colleagues on the other side either don't believe or don't care that their preferred policies would make the poor poorer and the hungry hungrier. They seem unmoved by the arguments of many, including former Senate Majority Leader and Republican presidential nominee Bob Dole, that this bill would make it more difficult for millions of Americans to feed themselves and their families. For the last half-century, the Farm Bill has always included both agricultural subsidies and nutrition assistance. This combination makes a lot of sense. Every time that EBT card is swiped, farmers large and small, grocers, national chains, and local mom-and-pop stores, and banks, Wall Street and Main Street, all benefit. For American farmers and the agribusiness industry to succeed, they need customers to purchase the food that they produce. With the comprehensive nature of past farm bills, it is no surprise that 532 agriculture, conservation, rural development, finance, energy, and crop insurance groups oppose the Republican leadership's cynical ploy to separate nutrition assistance from the rest of the Farm Bill. We talk about how SNAP benefits go to individuals, but if the truth be told, the real beneficiaries are local communities and enterprises. My Republican colleagues claim to be big supporters of small businesses, but you can't support small businesses if you don't support their customers. This ill-advised legislation would also hurt businesses that have nothing to do with food. In my district, the average household income among SNAP employees, SNAP recipients, is less than $15,000 a year. If these low-income people lose access to nutrition assistance, money they would otherwise spend on other needs will be spent instead on food, taking customers away from other businesses throughout our economy. Out-of-a-job market, supermarket workers will also have less money to spend. Less demand means fewer jobs. An analysis by the Department of Agriculture of similar SNAP cuts last year found that more than 50,000 jobs would be affected. SNAP funding is crucial to our economy because those dollars go directly into the local economy.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Reserve the balance.
Gentlelady reserves the balance. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I yield to the gentleman from Arkansas, one of my subcommittee chairmen, Mr. Crawford, 1.5 minutes.
Gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 3102, the Nutrition Reform and Work Opportunity Act. Legislation takes a significant step in reforming the food stamp program by preserving benefits for Americans truly in need of help while holding accountable those who are capable of helping themselves. Throughout the Obama presidency, we've seen food stamp program grow exponentially because the government continues to turn a blind eye to a system fraught with abuse. This legislation will no longer allow states to exploit various loopholes, such as artificially making people eligible simply by mailing a TANF brochure or substantially increasing benefits by sending a nominal LIHEAP check. This legislation also no longer allows states to waive work requirements that were put in place in the 1996 Welfare Reform Law. As another Arkansan, President Bill Clinton, said when he signed the reform bill into law, we are making, quote, welfare what it was meant to be, a second chance, not a way of life. The reforms in this bill will give people a second chance by ensuring food stamps will be there when people fall on hard times, but promoting self-sufficiency through employee training programs so able-bodied Americans can get back to work. Madam Speaker, this bill preserves and protects the food stamp program for the most vulnerable Americans by putting an end to institutional abuses that threaten its future viability. We can't expect to continue to provide assistance to the poor if we allow abuse to the bankrupt food stamp system. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation so that we may restore integrity to the program and continue to provide for those in need. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me just say that the 1st District of Arkansas, which my colleague represents, has a SNAP recipient percentage of 18.2%. Madam Speaker, I am pleased to yield to one of my fellow subcommittee ranking members on the Agriculture Committee, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McIntyre, 1 minute.
Mr. McIntyre, or gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On Monday, I visited a food bank in my district to discuss the importance of healthy food for healthy families. And it's clear from their example, among many, that a healthy mind and a healthy body means a healthy workforce and a more productive economy. In May, the Agriculture Committee passed a bipartisan farm bill with reforms to nutrition that would have saved almost $40 billion. That bill was defeated, and now we're considering a bill with serious ramifications that have proposed cuts that are not bipartisan and that go way too far. They will take away food from children, from seniors, from veterans, and military families. Our children are our future, and ensuring their access to healthy meals at school and at home is critical. The greatest generation paved our path to prosperity. How dare we not honor our seniors and take food from them on their tables? And third, those who serve in our military, we should keep our promises and make sure that they and their families and our veterans do not go hungry. As one who's worked with both sides of the aisle, I implore my colleagues to oppose this bill, work together, find a bipartisan common sense solution that stays true to our nation's commitments to our children, our seniors, our veterans, and our military families. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extemporaneous material on H.R. 3102.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I yield to the gentleman from Iowa, the primary subcommittee chairman on this important issue, Mr. King. 2 minutes.
Gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam. Thank the Chairman for yielding me time, and I rise in support of H.R. 3102. And I'd like to explain my position with this bit of a narrative that when I came into this Congress a little over a decade ago, I was watching the growth in the nutrition program, the food stamp program, and I'm well aware that it was established to try to put an end to malnutrition in America. Now, it was growing too fast for me at that time. At that time, there were 19 million Americans that were on the food stamp program. By 2008, there were then 28.2 million Americans on the program. The cost in 2003 was about 25 million. The cost in 2008 was 37.6 billion, 25 billion in 03, 37.6 billion dollars in 2008. With 28.2 million people on food stamps. Today, our number is knocking on the door at 47 million people. From 19 million to 47 million people, from $25 billion to $78.4 billion. And we're watching an administration that has been advancing the expansion and the sign-up of the nutrition program by spending millions of dollars of advertising to get more people to sign up and hiring people to go out and recruit people to sign up for more food stamps. And I've listened to the testimony before the committee that we had from Raza that said that food insecurity is now a reason for obesity in America, that people have insecurity about where some of their future meals might come from. Therefore, they tend to overeat when they do get food, and we can help solve this obesity problem by giving an unlimited supply of food stamps, the EBT benefits to people, then we'll somehow get thinner. This thing has been turned completely around on its head from a problem of malnutrition to a problem of obesity, all tried by Democrats to solve with the same solution, which is more and more spending into a program. There won't be needy people that are taken off of this. There isn't going to be food come out of the mouths of babes. This is categorical. This is so that the resources are available to the people that need it, those that are truly hungry. And by the way, this remark that it is a cynical ploy, I completely disagree with. This is a sincere effort to manage our budget, and I'd yield back.
Gentleman continues to reserve. Gentlelady from Ohio.
Thank you so very much, Madam Speaker. I just want to say to the ranking member on the subcommittee that oversees SNAP, who has not called one meeting all year, that he has a 10% SNAP recipients in his district. Madam Speaker, I am pleased to yield to another of my fellow subcommittee ranking members on the Agriculture Committee and a member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, the gentleman from California, Mr. Costa, for 1 minute.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I thank the gentlewoman. I rise today in strong opposition to this irresponsible nutritional bill. Should these cuts take effect, hundreds and thousands of Californians in need will lose an access to a very important lifeline. This would include one of my constituents, Pazang Moa, a mother of 2 who works 33 hours a week and goes to school part-time in hopes of becoming a teacher to get out of this network, this lifeline that she's presently in. For her, the working poor, and in many cases, some of the most vulnerable veterans across our country, SNAP is a hand up, not a handout. It is a temporary safety net, not a lifestyle. As we emerge from the Great Recession, now is not the time to play politics with hunger. With our rich agricultural heritage, we are also a nation that has a duty to fight hunger across our homes. Former President Reagan maybe said it best. As long as there is one person in this country who is hungry, that's one person too many. Let's do the right thing, vote no on this bill, and fix it.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I yield to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rodney Davis, 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for yielding time. Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of the Nutrition Reform and Work Opportunity Act. The unfortunate reality is that 1 in 7 people in this country are on food stamps. Spending on the program has doubled since 2008, and the number of Americans on SNAP has doubled since 2003. Just as I believe that we must take care of fellow Americans who truly need the help, I also believe that we must address fraud and abuse in the SNAP program and provide opportunities and encouragement to put people back to work. When unemployment declines, the number of food stamp recipients still increases under our current system. This is simply unsustainable. It's time for some real change. This bill enforces the work requirements of able-bodied adults without dependents, similar to the reforms in Bill Clinton's 1996 bipartisan welfare reform bill. It eliminates taxpayer-funded advocacy campaigns, closes the heat and eat loophole, eliminates categorical eligibility to ensure program integrity, and ends state bonuses for administering the program. I also support the work and job training requirements in this bill. These programs offer real work skills. Investing in these skills will make individuals more marketable in the workplace. I've introduced a bill on the same topic called the Opportunity Knocks Act. It's going to encourage Americans to take job training courses while still being able to keep their unemployment benefits. These types of initiatives put Americans back to work. The most important step we can take to help those 47 million Americans on SNAP is to grow our economy and promote opportunities to put our family, friends, and neighbors back to work. The Farm Bill is a jobs bill. Let's move the process forward and support these reforms so that the taxpayer dollars are spent much more wisely. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentlelady from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate my colleague, but job training is great, but there is nothing in this bill that assures any money will go towards job training. And I also want to say that in Mr. Davis's district, 12.8% of his residents are on SNAP. Madam Speaker, it is my pleasure to yield to one of my colleagues on the Agricultural Committee, the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Delbene, 1 minute.
The gentlelady from Washington is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We're debating an extreme bill with no chance of becoming law when we could be weeks into conferencing a farm bill. SNAP has prevented millions from falling into poverty. In the western part of Washington state, 690,000 people are still experiencing hunger, and we should not be arbitrarily cutting off aid. This bill would force states to cut off people struggling to find a job, also stripping them of transportation and child care assistance. If states don't comply, they lose funds for the SNAP employment and training programs, like the model program we have in Washington state that has led many to self-sufficiency. Even at the height of the recession, 60% in Washington's programs found employment, and more than half were off assistance 2 years after the program. House leadership says this bill will lead to more people working. But how does cutting programs proven to help people find jobs accomplish this? All this bill does is cut the lifeline for 3.8 million hungry American families, children, veterans, and seniors. This is not a serious proposal. I urge my colleagues to vote no, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I rise to engage in a colloquy with the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Madam Chairman, I rise to engage in a colloquy with Chairman Lucas. Colorado has been a leader in training programs, and I want to ensure when passing this Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program Reform Bill that the formulas for states to receive federal funds for operating training programs are done in a way that encourages states to be active in helping individuals become self-sufficient. To clarify, I would like to work with the Chairman to make sure federal dollars are available to states like Colorado who actively move people to self-sufficiency.
I am aware of the leadership of Colorado in this area. I look forward to working with the gentleman from Colorado as we move forward with this legislation to ensure that federal dollars are available to states that actively move people to self-sufficiency. Thank you.
Gentlelady from Ohio.
Thank you. Yes, Colorado has been a leader, but the bill specifically gives states the ability to spend savings any way they choose. Madam Speaker, I am happy to yield to another one of my colleagues on the Agriculture Committee, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Negrete McLeod. 1 minute.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I strongly oppose the proposed cuts offered by H.R. 3102. As a member of the Agriculture Committee, I am greatly concerned that this is a $39 billion cut to our nation's most powerful anti-poverty tool, a tool because each month SNAP helps feed 3.4 million households with elderly individuals. In 2011, 4.8 million Americans over the age of 60 lacked access to food. Some seniors are already making the decision between food or their medicine. Cuts to SNAP will only intensify the problem, sending seniors into deeper destitution and hunger. I ask the bill's supporters, how will these Americans eat without the means to afford food? I urge my colleagues to remember the most vulnerable constituents in their states and to vote no on this bill. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. A gentlelady continues to reserve. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I yield to the gentleman from North Dakota, Congressman Kramer. 1 minute.
The gentleman from North Dakota is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Mr. Chairman. I don't question the sincerity of our Democrat colleagues' desire to feed the truly needy. I share in that commitment. But, Madam Speaker, I do resent the idea that somehow asking able-bodied adults without dependent children to at least be looking for work as a requirement to receive these benefits is somehow immoral. When did America trade the dignity of a job for a culture of permanent dependency? President Theodore Roosevelt writes in his autobiography about his life as a North Dakota rancher. In Chapter 4, in Cowboy Land, he writes, "We knew toil and hardship, hunger and thirst, but we felt the beat of the hardy life in our veins because ours was the glory of work and the joy of living." Madam Speaker, I say let's encourage the dignity of work again and pass these modest reforms, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Ohio.
Thank you. And I just want to say to my friend that able-bodied work has always been in the Farm Bill. What is changed by this bill is that it takes away the opportunities for governors to request a waiver when their unemployment rate is very high. Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to another member of the Agriculture Committee, the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Lujan Grisham.
As for 1 minute.
Thank you to my colleague from Ohio, and thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to this disastrous bill that cuts $40 billion from SNAP, a vital program that feeds over 442,000 New Mexicans, half of whom are children. I want to share the story of Lene Havens, which shows just how much SNAP means to the people in my district. Lene is a single mother with a handsome 9-year-old son named Connor. She works full-time, but she doesn't make a lot of money. She has to pay for child care, rent, transportation to work, utility costs, and all the other expenses families face. Now, that doesn't leave much money for food, and certainly not for the healthy, nutritious food that growing children need. Now, Connor suffers from anemia. Without her $33 a week in food assistance, Lene says there's no way she's able to feed her son the protein and iron-rich foods he desperately needs. She's terrified of what happens if she loses SNAP. Now, I did the SNAP challenge, and it's just enough to get by. You can't buy fresh vegetables, you can't buy enough protein, and the thought that we would make it even less for those Americans who need it is unconscionable. I don't want Connor to go hungry, and I urge all of my colleagues to vote against this bill. I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to a gentleman who's worked very diligently on this bill, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Sutherland.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank and commend you, Mr. Chairman, on your great work. There's been a lot of things talked today and in the past about the motivation. I've been very involved in this bill. And I know that the ranking member, she and I have gotten to know each other, and it has been a pleasure, and I mean that sincerely. I want you to know that, Madam Speaker, that my motivation has only been to introduce the blessing of work to able-bodied people.
You know, Madam Speaker, from your chair, you look down the center aisle and you can see one of 23 faces that are atop of this room. The face you're looking at is the face of Moses. That is the only face that is a full frontal view and not a side view like the other 22 faces that surround this room. It was his work, the work of Moses, that in the very first chapter of Genesis, God created Adam, placed him in the garden to work it. Work is not a penalty. Work is a blessing. And God's very first work was to introduce the responsibility of an able-bodied individual to do not just a physical activity, not just an economic activity, but in every sense of the word, a spiritual activity. And what we have done in this country is wrong. We have failed in introducing the blessing of work to able-bodied people who have the ability, who are mentally, physically, psychologically able to work, and we have robbed them of knowing a better life that they help create for themselves and their families. I want to be very clear. This bill excludes children. It excludes the disabled. It excludes seniors. It makes sure that able-bodied individuals who are mentally, physically, and psychologically able to work know the blessing that God intended. There's been a lot of talk about Scripture and a lot of talk about God's plan, and I want people to know that it was Moses, who in this very room is placed in a position of prominence. It was his very first chapter that he gave us God's plan for able-bodied. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady from Ohio.
Thank you so much. You know, and I do consider Mr. Sutherland a friend, but I would just say that we cannot pick and choose what we take out of the Bible. The Bible mentions the word poor, hungry more than 200 times. Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to another member of the Agriculture Committee, the gentlewoman from New Hampshire, Ms. Custer.
Gentlelady from New Hampshire is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. And I want to address my remarks to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle because I, too, believe in work. But in the northern part of my district, we have veterans who are unable to find work. I recently visited the Bridge House in rural North Country of New Hampshire, which provides for the homeless, many of them veterans. It's already hard for folks to find a job, especially for returning veterans who had faithfully served our country. Yet this bill says that they should go hungry. My constituents are frugal Yankees. They believe that every tax dollar should be spent wisely or not spent at all. And they agree that we cannot afford the subsidies for agribusiness that this underlying bill that has now gone over to the Senate continues to include. Let's ask ourselves, who are we as a people? Would we truly not feed a homeless veteran? We are Americans, and Americans take care of each other. The United States is an exceptional country, and now is the time to prove it. I urge my colleagues to vote no.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor and privilege to yield to the Majority Floor Leader of the United States House of Representatives, Mr. Cantor, 1 minute.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the Chairman, the gentleman from Oklahoma, for the leadership that he has demonstrated throughout this process on this bill, on the Farm Bill, and know that his heart has been placed into this process and know that the outcome will be one that has been benefited by his leadership throughout the last several years in his dedication and leadership on this issue, and I thank him for that. And Madam Speaker, I do rise today in support of the Nutrition Reform and Work Opportunity Act. You know, this bill is designed to give people a hand when they need it most. And most people don't choose to be on food stamps. Most people want a job. Most people want to go out and be productive so that they can earn a living, so that they can support a family, so that they can have hope for a more prosperous future. They want what we want. And if others, and there may be some that choose to abuse the system, that's not out of the realm of possibility, frankly, it's wrong for hard-working, middle-class Americans to pay for that. So, Madam Speaker, I want to tell you a story that's very fitting for this bill. So there was a woman from Arkansas. Her name was Sherry. She moved there to that state with her 2 children, ages 11 and 14. She lived with her mom, and the 4 of them shared a 2-bedroom apartment. Sherry didn't have much work experience as a stay-at-home mom, so she applied for help through Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, otherwise known as the TANF program. The welfare program that President Clinton and a Republican Congress reformed in 1996 to impose work requirements for able-bodied adults. Sherry's case officer worked with her to obtain an on-the-job training position at a local hotel, where she was hired for an entry-level position before she was quickly promoted to being a team leader. As the Department of Workforce Services in Arkansas reported, Sherry's welfare case was closed and she continued her job at that hotel, a job she loved, going so far as to equate her coworkers with family. And like a family, when the hotel was remodeled, they gave Sherry the hotel furniture for her own apartment. Now, Madam Speaker, there is dignity in work, and I'm supporting this bill today because I want to see, as I know all of us do, more success stories like Sherry's. And the reforms made by this bill will put people on the path to self-sufficiency and independence. I also want to say, Madam Speaker, there's been a lot of demagoguery around this bill, and unfortunately a lot of misinformation. Because the truth is, anyone subjected to the work requirements under this bill who are able-bodied under 50 will not be denied benefits if only they are willing to sign up for the opportunity for work. There is no requirement that jobs exist. There are workfare programs. There are options under the bill for community service. This bill is a bill that points to the dignity of a job to help people when they need it most with what they want most, which is a job. And again, I'd like to thank the gentleman from Oklahoma, Chairman Lucas, for his leadership, and the gentleman from Florida who just spoke before, Congressman Steve Sutherland, for their hard work on this issue. I'd also like to recognize a member of my staff who I can tell you has personally been a teacher to me on welfare policy and how the wrong policies can destroy a person's self-identity and lull them into a life of dependence, but how the right policies can help lift people out of poverty and on a path to independence. Roger Mann, Madam Speaker, who's here in the chamber, has dedicated his professional life to helping lawmakers adopt the right policies. I'm privileged to have Roger as a part of my team and as my teacher. This House and this country benefit from his knowledge and dedication on this very emotional issue, and I thank him for his service and guidance. Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support this legislation.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Oklahoma has 10.5 minutes remaining. The gentlelady from Ohio has 17 minutes remaining. Gentlelady from Ohio.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to say that 1 in 8 Virginians are on SNAP, that able-bodied adults without dependents already work if there is a job. And we all know that there are 3 people for every available job in this country. Madam Speaker, I now yield to the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Meng, 1 minute.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Unfortunately, this is the second time this year that the other side of the aisle has proposed funding SNAP at a level that completely disregards the purpose of the program. This newest iteration disrespects families struggling to survive and parents who are unable to feed their children. It doubles down on a determination to end hunger assistance and increase the suffering of our nation's most vulnerable. There is only one word that comes to mind: cruel. Cruel to seniors, cruel to children, cruel to veterans, cruel to people struggling to survive with a shred of dignity. Children, elderly, disabled, and currently employed make up 92% of SNAP recipients. Yesterday, an elderly veteran called my office about his incredible struggle to purchase enough food. He said that without SNAP, he does not know how he'll survive. I want to take time to thank the organizations in my district and throughout New York City, Queens Jewish Community Council, Masbia, CPC, KCS, South Asian Council for Social Services, and the Hispanic Federation for the amazing work they do every day to help our community. I want to take this opportunity to reaffirm my commitment to the millions of people relying on SNAP and the millions more that oppose cutting this program. Thank you.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to yield to my next-door neighbor from across the state line in the great state of Kansas, Mr. Hulskamp. 1 minute.
Gentleman from Kansas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise in support of H.R. 1302. Participation in SNAP has grown 83% since 2008 and will cost us nearly $80 billion this year alone. It is imperative that Congress takes steps to rein in this out-of-control entitlement, and I believe this bill does that. The work requirements in this bill go to the heart of the reforms I have been advocating since I began working on similar bills nearly 3 years ago. It follows a simple line of thought. If you're a healthy adult and don't have someone relying on you to care for them, you ought to earn the benefits you receive. Look for work. Start job training to improve your skills or do community service, but you can no longer sit on your couch or ride a surfboard like Jason in California and expect the federal taxpayer to feed you. I also like to applaud my home state of Kansas for moving to reinstate work requirements for Kansas adults. The folks in Kansas recognize that if you want to help people get back to work, you shouldn't pay them not to work. Well, Washington should follow our example. Support fiscal responsibility, support a paycheck over a welfare check, support the bill. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentlelady from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Crowley, 1 minute.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last time we considered devastating cuts to nutrition programs, I brought messages my constituents had written on paper plates, telling stories how much the SNAP programs have helped them. I read aloud each plate's personal, heartbreaking story of the difference food assistance makes for a parent, a student, or a family. But today, I have an empty plate, because that's what so many of my constituents would see if this bill became law. In fact, 27,000 to be specific. I thought about bringing 27,000 plates like this one down here to make my point, but I decided not to create that kind of a waste just to make a point that's already so obvious. The Republicans want you to believe that we don't have the money to feed hungry kids, but that we can afford subsidies for big oil, tax breaks for corporate jet owners. It is ridiculous. If this week doesn't show the backward priorities of the Republican majority, I don't know what will. The short-sighted slash-and-burn approach to governing won't get this country moving forward. Taking food away from children? The sad truth is, all that's being served up by the Republicans is a lack of vision. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Speaker, I yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. Lamalfa, 1 minute.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in full support of H.R. 3102. This common-sense bill reforms the SNAP program and simply requires that able-bodied adults without dependents obtain employment, participate in job training activities, or perform voluntary community service activities in exchange for continued benefits. I've been hearing a lot of chatter these days about how there aren't any jobs out there to get people back to work. Perhaps if government weren't killing businesses through over-regulation, increased taxes, and bureaucratic delays, it might be easier to get people back to work. The President did state 3 days ago the economy is improving and jobs are being created. So it seems reasonable to get people into job training programs in order to get these job openings filled. So let's say the President is wrong about these. Even in the most economically challenged areas of this nation, there are opportunities to better one's community through volunteerism. Who in this body can argue with work or volunteer requirements for able-bodied adults without dependents? When did asking able-bodied adults to look for work become an unrealistic or demeaning request. This bill preserves the SNAP program for those who need the assistance while also helping them to find employment and live the American dream. How does any of that sound unreasonable? Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentlelady from Ohio.
Yes, thank you. And I just want to say that Mr. Lamalfa's, in his district, 10% of all households are on SNAP. Mr. Speaker, I yield to the gentleman from Washington. Mr. Heck, 1 minute.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to oppose H.R. 3102. Ending nutrition assistance for millions of hungry children and adults in the middle of a fragile economic recovery is frankly close to the very last thing we should be doing right now. As former Republican Senate Leader Bob Dole wrote in the L.A. Times this week, this is no time to play politics with hunger. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the district I represent has one of the highest concentrations of veterans in all of the United States, and I feel morally compelled to point out that the legislation before us would end nutrition assistance for as many as 170,000 veterans who currently receive them. These are men and women who have served our country with honor and were prepared to give the last full measure of devotion to America. So while I absolutely appreciate Mr. Rogers pointing out the flaw herein, assurances, however genuine, that we will try to take care of this later do not measure up to the sacrifice these men and women have made. Whatever your image, your stereotypical image in your head you carry around of the average recipient, please understand that that includes the men and women who wore our nation's uniform. And when you know that, you will vote no. Thank you very much, Mr.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Speaker, I yield to the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Mrs. Elmers, 1 minute.
Gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 3102, the Nutrition Reform and Work Opportunity Act, and I commend the chairman for his tireless work on this effort. The efforts to put in place sensible reforms and close loopholes to improve this nutrition program, one of which has been mentioned many times, the modest work requirements of people who are able to do so. We will be able to save nearly $40 billion over 10 years. All we are asking is that those receiving benefits that do not have children, without disabilities, and do not have any other extreme circumstances simply work, volunteer, train, or go to school for 20 hours a week. Mr. Speaker, we are preserving this program for those that truly need it. I urge my colleagues to support these important reforms so that the truly vulnerable never go hungry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The gentlelady from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, could we have, could you tell us how much time is still in debate? Thank you.
The gentlelady from Ohio has 13 3/4 minutes remaining. And the gentleman from Oklahoma has 7 1/2 minutes remaining.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am happy to yield to another of my colleagues on the Agriculture Committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, for 1 minute.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. If this was only about work reforms, that would be something, but it's far, far more. These are devastating cuts. Hunger is real. In my northern counties, the counties along the Sacramento River, Sutter, Glenn, Colusa, and Yuba counties, 20% of the citizens in those counties are hungry. They need food. This bill would dramatically affect that. My daughter's a teacher. She has a community garden. She went to find a kid that wasn't getting on the bus in her kindergarten class. He was hidden underneath the cucumbers in the garden, stuffing his pockets full of tomatoes and cucumbers so that on the weekend he would have food for himself and his brother. Hunger is real. It's real in every one of our districts, and this particular bill devastates the food programs for seniors, for working men and women, and for those who desperately need help. I oppose the bill. I would ask for compassion from our colleagues on the Republican side and put this bill down and get on with the decent legislation. I yield back and ask to extend and revise my remarks.
Time of the gentleman has expired, and without objection so ordered. The gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Benedictos, 1 minute.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member of the Anti-Poverty Initiative,
I have been blessed to work closely with the people on the ground who are committed to lifting people out of poverty. Many in Washington believe a hand out is a hand up. It's not. We need a social safety net that focuses on empowering the individual. The men and women I've met with all wanted me to hear their story. I asked them directly, what do we do that works? What do we do that doesn't work? And how can I make it better? All the men and women shared the same themes. Lift me spiritually, not just economically. They told me they don't want to be taken care of. They want to be able to take care of themselves and are challenged to find and utilize the gifts God blessed them with. I am proud to say many of the reforms in this bill didn't come from a bunch of people in suits and ties here in Washington, D.C. They came directly from the American families we are trying to help. This bill is a forward-looking approach that propels people towards opportunity. It fulfills the promise made in the Declaration that our country believes in the right to pursue happiness, however each citizen defines it. Thank you. I yield back my time.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentlelady from Ohio.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We have been joined by the whip. I would now like to give 3 minutes to Mr. Hoyer.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady, and I thank her for her leadership on this issue. And I lament with Mr. Lucas that we don't have a bipartisan bill, because I know that's what he wanted, that's what he forged, and that's what's been abandoned, unfortunately, by his party. I think that's sad for the country. It's even sadder for the people who will be so adversely affected. Mr. Speaker, several weeks after House Republicans broke with long-standing practice and cut nutrition program funding out of the Farm Bill, they are now bringing a nutrition-denying bill to the floor. Shockingly, their version of nutrition assistance is to cut $40 billion over the next 10 years from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program called SNAP. What does this mean? For 14% of our fellow citizens, luckily 86% of us are doing pretty well. We can put a meal on the table. We can feed our children. But 14% of our fellow citizens can't have confidence that they can do that. Has America fallen so low in its moral compass that we are not prepared to make sure that in the richest country on the face of the earth they have food on their table? Have we fallen that low? It means 210,000 children dropped from the school meals program. It means 170,000 veterans in need losing some or all of their food assistance. It will affect Americans of all ages, and it will especially harm seniors, students, and individuals with disabilities. Tuesday's Census Bureau report confirms that too many Americans remain in poverty as a result of lingering effects from the recession. This is reflected in the rise over the past few years in the number of Americans who rely on food assistance to eat a decent meal from day to day. In the wealthiest country on earth, there is no reason why so many Americans should have to go hungry. And now is certainly not the time for Congress to make it harder for them to feed themselves and their families. Do we need to bring down the deficit? We do. Do we need to do it on the backs of the poor? We do not. Instead, we ought to be helping Americans find jobs and access opportunities so they will no longer need SNAP assistance. We should go to conference with the Senate, as I know my friend Mr. Lucas wanted to do, which passed a bipartisan farm bill in June by a vote of 66 to 27, two-thirds of the members of the United States Senate, a majority of the House Agriculture Committee, and in my view, a majority of this House wanted to do this. But we did not do it. Of course, we should have gone to conference weeks ago, but sadly this Congress remains dysfunctional. I urge my colleagues to defeat this punitive legislation, and I call on the Speaker to appoint conferees for the Farm Bill so we can see a compromised version reflecting the compassion and wisdom, 30 additional seconds, and compassion and wisdom shown by bipartisan acting Congress over the last 4 decades. I thank Mr. Lucas for his leadership and regret that it is not being followed, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Oklahoma. The chair will receive a message.
That's good. Very good.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Madam
Mr.
Secretary.
Speaker, I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has passed with an amendment, H.R. 527, cited as the Responsible Helium Administration and Stewardship Act, in which the concurrence of the House is requested.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Speaker, I yield to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Stutzman, 1 minute.
The gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to urge my colleagues to support H.R. 3102, the Nutrition Reform and Work Opportunity Act. This is an opportunity to enact common sense reforms. I'd like to thank Leader Cantor and especially Chairman Lucas for their leadership and long hours of hard work. Mr. Speaker, food stamps and farm policy should be considered individually and on their own merits. It's just common sense, and it's exactly why we are here. In July, we passed a farm-only farm bill that ended direct payments and made other reforms. Today, we have an opportunity to continue that work by passing a food stamp bill that doubles the savings that the House originally considered. We can save taxpayers $40 billion by eliminating loopholes, ensuring work requirements, and putting food assistance on a fiscally responsible path. In the real world, we measure success by results. It's time for Washington to measure success by how many families are lifted out of poverty and helped back on their feet, not by how much Washington bureaucrats spend year after year. I urge all of my colleagues to support this common sense step in the right direction. With that, yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentlelady from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased to yield 1 minute to another member of the Agriculture Committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Vargas.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition of this bill. Senator Dole is right. This is no time to play politics with hunger. And I want to thank those in the faith community that have come out against these cuts to the nutrition program because of the moral imperative in the Bible. And when I was hungry, you gave me to eat. Matthew 25. I want to thank in particular Reverend David Beckman, who writes, the proposed cuts are a clear indication that some in Congress underestimate the hunger that is present in American homes. To continue with the quote, the bill picks on the poorest people in the country. This is morally and economically unacceptable, especially as some areas continue to experience high unemployment. I also want to thank Reverend Stephen Blair. Adequate and nutritious food is a fundamental human right and the basic need that is integral to the protecting the life and dignity of the human person. Please defeat this bill. It's the wrong thing to do. In a country as rich as our own, we can feed the poor. It's the most basic imperative in the Bible. Thank you.
The gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Speaker, might I inquire how much time is remaining for both myself and the ranking member?
The gentleman from Oklahoma has 5½ minutes remaining, and the gentlelady from Ohio has 8¾ minutes remaining.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to note that the ranking member that I potentially have some additional speakers. They've not made an appearance yet. Therefore, I would reserve the balance of my time if they do not appear to close.
The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves his time. The gentlelady from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my privilege and pleasure to yield to our Democratic leader, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Pelosi, for 1 minute.
Gentlelady from California, the minority leader, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I thank her also for her leadership on this really very important issue to the values of our country. Her service on the Agriculture Committee is indeed a blessing to us all as we fight for our children. And Mr. Lucas, thank you for your leadership of the committee as well. I know you tried to bring a bipartisan bill to the floor. What happened after that? Well, I won't go into it. I also want to salute Colin Peterson, our colleague on the committee. We need a farm bill. We want to have a good farm bill for our farmers, for our ranchers, for food security, for our country. So hopefully we can get to that place, but not with doing violence to our children. Mr. Speaker, this body is so magnificent because it's so diverse.
We represent districts all over the country. We represent people of different backgrounds all over the country. But one thing, among others, but one thing that we certainly have in common is that each one of us has people in our district. Each of us has people in our district, have people in our districts who depend on the SNAP program for their nutrition. There isn't one person in this room who could rise up and say, nobody in my district relies on the nutrition programs that are in the Farm Bill. Chief among them are children, seniors, veterans and their families. They are the real faces of hunger in America, and their stories are the most compelling reason to reject this dangerous Republican legislation. In my district in San Francisco, people from all walks of life have relied on the SNAP program to make it through tough and trying times. One young woman I want to highlight is Caitlin, now in her 20s, worked hard at a part-time job to put herself through college. But as the recession took its toll on students across the country looking for work, Caitlin found that she could not afford to pay rent and purchase food each month. Because she qualified for Emergency Food SNAP Initiative, she was able to get by, get a promotion, and now works full-time. There's Brian, 50 years old and homeless. Even though he searches constantly for full-time employment, he spends his spare time volunteering at St. Anthony's Dining Room, helping other people, a place that helps other people to find food, to find shelter, clothes, and compassion in our community. There he gives back what little he has to the community, wholeheartedly serving our seniors, veterans, children, and families who also rely on the generosity of people like Brian to feed themselves and their loved ones. Like Brian and Caitlin, millions of people across America are working hard and giving all they have to lift themselves up and help others get on their feet. I've heard my colleagues talk about, one of them said something, if you don't work, you shouldn't eat, or something to that effect. I hope I heard it incorrectly. It's really important to note that because of the low minimum wage in our country, a family of 4 with both parents working full-time and earning the minimum wage are below the poverty line. They don't even come close to the 130% of poverty. They are below the poverty line. So in some respects, the SNAP program is subsidizing a low minimum wage in our country, as other support does as well. I wish that we could respect how hard it is for a family of 4 with 2 people working full-time, not making enough money to put food on the table, that we respect them for their struggle and for their concern for their families, and not judge them that they shouldn't have food on the table because our country has chosen to pay a sub-living wage to so many people in our country. The Republicans' proposal on the floor today slashes at the legs on which many of these people stand. Indeed, cutting the investments is a full assault on the health and economic security of millions of families. Consider this, 1 in 5 children, that's soon becoming 1 in 4, but 1 in 5 children struggle with hunger, and nearly half of all SNAP recipients are children. Nearly 4 million Americans over age 60 rely on nutrition assistance. 5,000 active-duty military families, rely on SNAP, depend on SNAP. Nearly 3 million veterans and their families don't get enough to eat each month. 3 million veterans, and this bill will jeopardize food assistance for as many as 170,000 veterans. A couple weeks ago, I was in Houston, Texas, visiting my grandchildren, and we were at Mass, and the sermon was a beautiful one about, and the Bible was, actually the gospel was that day too, Many of our colleagues have quoted the Gospel of Matthew, when I was hungry, you gave me to eat, and other parts of the Bible. And the Gospel that day was talking about how, the prayers that day were talking about how we have a responsibility to each other. And in the sermon, the priest said something that I think we should consider as we consider our vote here today. He said, you just can't come to church and pray on Sunday and go out and prey on people the rest of the week. This legislation is preying, P-R-E-Y-I-N-G, on people, on children, on veterans, on seniors, on all those who are struggling to do their best in our country. It is our moral obligation to reject this legislation and to preserve the investments, these investments that every American needs, for Americans who need them and other Americans who want them to have it. It is our moral duty to vote down this measure and to work across the aisle in conference on a comprehensive farm bill that ensures food security, supports our farmers and ranchers, and strengthens rural communities. Community. That should be the word of the hour. What is our responsibility to community? It certainly isn't to say to kids, we want you to do your best in school, but we're not going to fuel your mind by giving you food to eat. Or to thank our veterans by depriving them of this, our seniors, for all that they have done. Something is very wrong with this picture. But I know one thing for sure. Every person who votes for this Republican measure is voting to hurt his or her own constituents, because we all represent people who at some time need help. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time.